What's growing on, gardeners? On today's 2-minute garden tip, I'm going to share a simple pruning cut that most of us should be making to all of our tomato plants right now. Pruning tomato plants has become somewhat controversial because how you prune them will depend highly on the type of tomato that you're growing, as well as the infrastructure that you're growing the tomato up against. For example, dwarf and determinate style tomatoes should almost never be pruned because they only grow to be about 30 inches to 48 inches tall, depending on the variety, and they grow like a bush, and they form suckers along the main stem. So you never want to remove any of those suckers because if you do, the tomatoes won't produce any flowers. Indeterminate tomatoes, like all the plants you see right here, grow as vines, and they will grow indefinitely until they are killed by something like frost, pests, or disease. And how you prune them will depend on many factors, like are you growing them on a stake, on a string trellis like this, on a cattle panel trellis? How far apart? Did you space them? Are they a cherry tomato type? Are they a beefsteak type? How you prune your indeterminate tomato plants is up to you and will vary based on your infrastructure. Everybody has a different opinion on the best way to do this. But one thing is always true no matter what type of tomato you are growing. You always want to remove the leaf branches below the first flower cluster. That's because these leaf branches get very low to the ground and often touch the ground. So every single time you irrigate or it rains and it splashes soil from the ground onto the undersides of the leaves, that helps speed up the colonization of bacterial and fungal diseases. Now for a determinate tomato plant like you see right here, these lower leaf nodes are the only thing that is safe to remove on the plant. And as you can see, this red snapper variety already has signs of early blight. So it is very important that we remove the lowest leaf nodes that are touching the ground. That way they will be out of the splash zone of the plant. And that's really all we have to do. We just want to get rid of those that are touching the ground. That way, when it rains, it will no longer splash the soil onto the undersides of the leaves. Now, it's good practice to rub down our shears with a little bit of rubbing alcohol in between each and every plant so we don't spread those diseases. I recommend you do this just to sanitize them from plant to plant. Now we're going to do the same thing to our dwarf tomato project tomatoes. This is a dwarf variety called Adelaide Festival, and just like determinate varieties, we never want to remove the suckers that come off the main stem at a 45-degree angle like you see right here. Never remove them. Only remove the lower leaf nodes that come off the stem at a 90-degree angle. If we remove the suckers on these little tiny dwarf and determinate plants, that's where the flowers come from. And since they top out at only around 3 feet tall or so, you won't get any flowers if you remove all those suckers. We only need to clean up the bottom to get everything out of the splash zone. Whether or not to remove suckers on indeterminate tomatoes is always up for debate in the gardening community. Me personally, for my beefsteak tomatoes, I like to allow a few suckers at the bottom to form main stems. I like to have about 3 main stems on a beefsteak tomato, and then I'll remove a lot of the suckers above that. For cherry tomatoes, I remove very few suckers. However, one thing that is not up for debate is that the diseased lower leaves on this pink princess cherry tomato have got to go. So I really need to cut these off right here because they are already showing signs of disease. And we're going to do that for all of our indeterminate tomato plants so they don't have any of these leaf nodes that are lower down on the plant and in that dangerous splash zone. We are not going to remove any suckers at this time. Then we are going to pick up all of the tomato leaves that we just pruned off and we are going to either trash them or burn them. I do not recommend you compost tomato leaves, especially if they show even the slightest hint of disease. You do not want those diseases growing in your compost. The only exception is if you are a hot composter and you are positive that your compost gets so warm that it will kill all of the pathogens. If your plants are at least 18 inches tall and they've been transplanted out into your garden for at least 2 weeks so they've had time to become well rooted, now is probably a pretty good time to do this. And that's today's 2-minute garden tip.
If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon storefront and spread shop in the video description for a list of the gardening products I use and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.